Hello, what I'm going to show you today is how I go about making tea light holders out of glass bottles. The reason for this is I know that most of us when we start engraving we use glass bottles a lot. I mean they're free, they're usually about the house anyway, so you might as well use them. You've got to engrave on something, so why not engrave on something you'd probably just be throwing out anyway. The downside with bottles is that the glass is really hard. It's hard on the bits, it's hard on the equipment. And it doesn't actually engrave quite well. It's hard to get very good highlights in it. But, as I said, it's free, it's there, so let's use it. The other main downside with bottles is whatever you do with them, they're always going to end up looking like bottles. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can engrave special mementos for people, for special occasions. Or you could maybe add some little bottle lights to them. These are little battery powered ones, which makes it look quite pretty. Little nice engraved on that one. So that's a couple of ways of using bottles. But if you don't actually want it to look too much like a bottle, all you can really do is kind of cut bits off it. So, for example, with this one, what I've done is I've cut the top off the bottom. And it's quite a nice shape of bottle to start with, but I've taken the top of it, engraved a little thistle on it, and it makes quite a nice vase, or vase, depending on which part of the country you're in. But if you go one step further, what you can do is create these little cylinders of glass. Obviously that's just a bottle, the top and the bottom cut off it. And these are what I use to make tea light holders. This one's got crocuses on it, and this one's got feathers. So I'll go through the process of how I do that. Now obviously there's an extra trick between getting from this to a tea light holder, and I'll show you that at the end, but I'll give you a bit of a clue. It involves some woodwork. Obviously the first thing you have to do if you're going to try to do this is find a way to cut your bottles. The way I do that is using this wet tile saw. Now I'm not trying to say this is the best way of doing it. There are loads and loads of YouTube videos of people showing different ways to cut bottles. It's just that this is the way I've found that is most reliable for me. I've tried using the kind of bottle cutting jig things that you can see on YouTube, admittedly homemade ones, so maybe not that good, and I seem to end up breaking more bottles than I actually managed to cut. So the wet tile saw is fairly reliable. I usually can end up with intact pieces of glass when I'm done. The only downside is it leaves quite a rough and jagged edge on it. That means I end up having to do really quite a lot of grinding of the glass when we're done, just to try and get a smooth finish on it. But it works quite well, and it lets me cut the bottles to whatever size I want. I should say as well that this wet tile saw I actually bought second hand, and it really didn't cost me very much money at all. So if you fancy giving this a go, do have a look out, see if you can find somebody selling off a machine. Maybe somebody's just finished tiling their kitchen. It doesn't need to be a big investment for you. So now I've managed to make the cuts on the glass, and I've got a couple of cylinders of glass to work with. I usually will cut more than one at a time because setting the machine up and then taking it apart again and cleaning it all up takes a bit of time, so I'll usually do these in little batches. So having got the glass cylinders cut, I now have to get rid of all that chipping on the edges, and I'm not going to lie to you, this is quite a slow process. I'm sure there are machines you could get that would do this really quickly, but I haven't got one. What I have are these diamond discs. They're obviously designed to go on some sort of machine. I don't know what kind of machine, but they're 6 inches roughly in diameter, and I've got 3 different grits. The coarse one that I'm using just now is about a 125 grit, and that's obviously the place to start. The medium one's about 400 grit, and the very fine one's about 1200. And as you can see, from the amount of white powder goo lying about all over the place, they actually work quite well. They take off the glass reasonably quickly, but it does require a bit of time. There's no point pretending that this is a quick job. As long as it's a nice afternoon, I can sit out in the garden, we get on fine. And that's the glass now on the final grit. That's about 1200 grit. And that will give me a nice smooth finish. I should say that's not a fine enough grit to give you a shiny finish. You would have to go much finer, up to maybe, I don't know, 4000, something like that. But it's good enough for what we're doing. And with the edges of the glass ground down, I can start engraving. I've chosen to put a fairly simple little tree of life design onto this one. And the first stage is just to roughly mark in on the glass where I want to do the engraving. I only do this because as I start to work, particularly with the dropper, I find all the ink lines that I put on tend to just come off. So going over it quickly helps to make sure I can see where I'm trying to engrave. With all the lines marked in, I can start the engraving using a little water dripper there to keep down the dust. And there's quite a sort of middle-sized spherical bit there. I'm not trying to do any fancy shading or anything. This is just a linear pattern in effect. I have to follow all my lines round the pattern, working my way down towards the trunk of the tree, and then fill in a little bit of the area of the trunk, because that's the only really thick area of engraving on the whole pattern, really. And then finally I can move down and do the roots of the tree, which are, they're a sort of Celtic knot pattern. At this stage I'll just go over the engraving and just make sure that I've got everything filled in. I did say I wasn't going to do any fancy shading or anything in this pattern, but at this point I've changed to a slightly different shaped bit, and I'm just using that to try and give an impression of the texture of bark on the trunk of the tree. So that's the engraving finished on this little cylinder of glass. And I did say at the start I would tell you how I make that into a tea light holder, and I'm guessing you've probably worked out already that it's not that hard. All you really need is a base of some kind for it to sit on. If you've got nothing else, I suppose you could use something like a saucer and put it on, but what I do is I have some offcuts of hardwoods that I have access to, and I use those to make little bases in different shapes, whatever I fancy on the day. And in each base what I've done is I've cut out a little section there for the glass to fit into. That obviously makes it a bit more stable so it doesn't slide around if you're moving or whatever. And then I've also drilled out a hole with a little Forstner bit for the tea light to sit in. If you have a Dremel or similar rotary tool, then you may well have already what you need to cut this little groove. I use this little cutting base which lets me work, making sure that the bit is kind of perpendicular to the surface. So that with either a cutting bit or a suitable router bit and a good steady hand will allow you then to cut out a groove for the glass to fit into if you choose to do that. So that's it. That's all my trade secrets for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. So here's the finished article, and if you've got any questions for me, just leave them in the comments. I'm usually reasonably good at answering the questions, although sometimes the answer has to be I don't know. And if there's anything else you'd like to see a video of, again, just leave me a comment. I'll see what I can do.